Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm so excited for because I think it's going to be a fun one and maybe a tad bit controversial. That's right, today I'm going to be tier ranking every single popular Booktok book that I have read over the years. Now, Booktok is huge. Booktok is massive. I am a huge lover of Booktok. I am both a consumer and a creator on this platform, so I truly really love this corner of the internet. I think with any bookish community there can be a lot of generalization in terms of the types of books that are present within this space, but I would also say, like any bookish area on the internet, there are so many large and small communities within it. I have found some of my favorite books I've ever read through recommendations from Booktok, and basically if you're interested in any like niche genre, there are other creators out there both on Booktube, on Booktok, and other places on the internet where people are chatting about them. Obviously today I'm going to be centering the most popular and common books that I personally run into. Even in my own like catered for you page, I still see these books recommended super often. These are also many of the books that kind of come up on those Booktok reading recommendation pages. That being said though, Booktok is so much more than these specific books, even if I love them, which there are many books on this list that I love very much. So I would just implore you before I jump in that if you feel like your For You page is not quite catered to your own personal taste, keep trying, keep looking, because there are truly so many incredible Booktok creators recommending some amazing books on a daily basis. But obviously, again, we're going to be chatting through the most popular ones that I feel like I see most often across genres that I've personally read. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the tier ranking video. Again, these are just the books that I've personally read. There are obviously other popular titles that I just haven't gotten to yet or just don't plan to pick up. From an organization point of view, I kept it simple and straightforward. This is kind of the structure I always have with all of my tier ranking videos. At the top of the list, we have must read. These are some of my favorite books I've ever read from Booktok, books that are 5 out of 5 stars, books I wholly and fully stand behind. And then the next category is great, a very solid read, a book I still would very much recommend, just maybe not in that 5-star category. We have good, which can be solid, maybe a little underwhelming, a little disappointing, depending on how much hype surrounds it, but definitely not necessarily like an overall bad book. Then we have and then lastly, we just have no, avoid at all costs, definitely overhyped, or just simply not very good. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive right in. Starting the list, we have Jade City. I'm so happy to see how much Jade City has taken off over on Booktok, because obviously Jade City is really popular on Booktube for good reason. Jade City is the first book to the Greenbone Saga, which is an urban fantasy series that's full of action and family and drama and centers a crime family set on the fictional island of Kakan. As you follow lots of different perspectives, mostly from one crime family. There's so much drama and action. I love this series so much. It's popular here and there for good reason. It's a 5 out of 5 star read for me, and honestly one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. So Booktok taste with this series is definitely strong. IMO. Next we have Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, which I'm going to put in great. This is an endearing tale that many people have read and love for good reason. I would describe this as kind of like cozy fantasy with romance, but kind of a lower spice romance. I do feel like there is a misconception that every single fantasy romance book recommended on Booktok is very, very spicy, but there are definitely books that are not, that are also popular, and this is definitely a great example of this. This is a story that follows our main character, Emily Wilde, who is a professor at Cambridge, and her specialization is researching fairies, and she's been working on this encyclopedia of all of this information over the course of her entire career, and she's almost done. At the beginning of this book, she's traveling to like a very faraway village to kind of gather a few remaining stories, and things sort of begin to spiral out of control, and especially when her like work rival also arrives, and there's just a lot of fun chemistry not only between these two characters, but really great like fantasy world building. I loved all of the Fae stories. It's really fun. It has a little bit of stress and anxiety, but I would say overall it's kind of a more straightforward and charming tale that I was delighted. I also really liked the sequel. Again, popular for good reason. I also, starting out strong with this list, we got Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, one of my all-time favorite authors. I've read most of her books. It's interesting to see that this is like the most recommended book of all of her books. It's not my favorite of this author's, but it's still excellent. I love a gothic horror story, and this is definitely a really interesting twist on that sort of haunted house, Jane Eyre-esque storyline, and I think the author does a great job kind of entwining new concepts and ideas within this story. Next up is Shatter Me by Tahera Mafi. Honestly, I have to put this in good, maybe at the back of good. I have not read this series in over a decade. Like, I read the Shatter Me series in high school, so it's been a minute, if I'm being honest. That being said, though, I can see why this book retrended on Booktok so long after its release, because it trended for a reason 10 years prior. It's a very fun and engaging YA dystopian-esque series, kind of coming out of that Hunger Games divergent dystopian era that I recall. With a little bit of wistfulness. This series centers a love triangle, a strong female main character who has power she struggles to control, a very well-paced and drawn-out romance. Like, I read this series and absolutely ate it up when I was younger, so like, I feel like I can understand why a lot of people are finding this series once again and enjoying it. Would it be something I would read and enjoy as much as I did now? But in the moment in my life when I did read it, I was obsessed. Warner was like, took over my life in high school and college. Like, I was so into this series, so I feel like for that I have fond wistful memories towards this. I would say it's good. I can't say I would love it as much now, but I can also understand why a lot of people are reading and enjoying it. If you like YA dystopian fantasy with a very central romantic subplot line, you're probably gonna like this series, and that's fine, you know? Next up, we have Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. I'm actually going to put this in I have read and enjoyed a lot of Leigh Bardugo books over the years, but honestly, the Shadow and Bone trilogy, another series I read many, many years ago, was one I never really personally clicked with. I liked the concept and the setting, this sort of historical Russian landscape following our main character who gets kind of involved within a revolution and rebellion. I feel like a lot of the themes and characters were great, but for some reason it personally just didn't land for me, and the pacing and just kind of the plotting over the course of the trilogy just wasn't my favorite. Again, though, I really enjoy Leigh Bardugo's writing, and I can also understand why this is popular, why people like it, but personally speaking, it just wasn't my favorite read, so I'm gonna put it in I think I DNF'd the trilogy. Like, I was like halfway through the third and final book and was just kind of like over it. Also in the category, I'm gonna put The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. The Midnight Library is kind of like one of those books I've deemed as my personal arch nemesis. I have very strong feelings toward it, which is maybe not so fair to the book itself, but I just personally very much dislike it. I found The Midnight Library to be personally very pandering and very shallow, and given what I feel like it was trying to do emotionally, it just didn't really land for me in a way that actually really frustrated me, if I'm being fully transparent. I just don't really like this book very much, and so it's going into the category. Get a Life Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. We're gonna put this in good. Get a Life Chloe Brown is a very endearing contemporary romance story and centers our main character who lives with chronic pain, and because of this she has decided to sort of make a list for herself to help her get a life. All of these things are kind of fun and lighthearted, and she kind of zeroes in on one of her hot neighbors to help her kind of get through this list, and obviously from there things get complicated, emotions begin to form. Each book in this series also follows a different sister, which I also really appreciated. Get a Life Chloe Brown is honestly just a fun, good time, and definitely I would recommend it. Another contemporary romance is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I recently marathoned this entire trilogy of romance books. The first one I would say is probably my least favorite, which I'd still put in the good category. Like, it was still good, but the other two I loved. The first book introduces us to two characters that are kind of from different worlds, if you will. One is like a medical family heiress. One is a guy living in a small town running a B&B. They come crashing into each other's lives, yada, yada, yada. Romance comes from there. I think I enjoyed this book. I appreciated the banters, the characters, and the romantic pacing. I just think some of the tropes and how things sort of played out wasn't really my favorite when it comes to contemporary romance stories, but I liked it enough to obviously carry on, and I think people love this for good reason. I think just for me, trope usage landed in a specific way, but it's still very good. From there, we also have Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. As I mentioned, I've read other Leigh Bardugo, and I really liked this particular book by this author, and this is sort of a paranormal, horror, dark academia series set on the Yale campus. We follow our main character who basically starts attending the school to work kind of undercover to keep track of all of the like secret societies that are using dark magic. I found the first one especially to be very compelling. I loved Alex, our main character. All of the dark magic was interesting. It's creepy, it's dark. It also really leans into a lot of the privilege that sort of exists in these old money families that are residing on this campus. Book 2 was a bit of a step down, but I still definitely recommend this series. Next up, we have Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, another one of honestly my favorite authors. I'll put Yellowface at like the top of good. I really enjoyed Yellowface. I found a lot of the topics and concepts to be super strong. I actually felt like I wanted it to be even more over the top than it was, but R.F. Kuang's writing in this was great. I enjoyed it. It's definitely like a 3.5 star read for me, and I would recommend it, but it wasn't like one of my all-time faves, like some of her other books that she has put out. Next up, we have Happy Place by Emily Henry. I'm gonna put this at must read. I think this is my favorite Emily Henry book, which is definitely maybe controversial. There's something about the angst and the miscommunication that works so well for me in this book, which I typically don't love. It just has so much drama in a way that I could not put down. I also love that it had kind of present and past storylines. We got to see the complexity of not only the romantic relationship, but all of the friendships and how things have evolved over the years. Not for everyone, but it was definitely for me. Similarly, I also really enjoyed the Atlas 6. I feel like I liked this book more than I was anticipating. This was one of my first like Booktok made me read it reads. Some of these books are popular on Booktok, but maybe I read them or found out about them before I was consuming Booktok, or they were kind of like parallel path, if you will. But Atlas 6 I read because of all of the hype on Booktok, and I really liked it. But I also love dark academia and the general setting of pompous individuals like doing anything they possibly can to get as much power as possible, and this sort of competition between mages and this secret society and all of the conflict and drama that arose from that was like honestly delicious. I had a great time reading the Atlas 6. And I was like, okay, Booktok. Another book I really recommended that's obviously making the rounds on Booktok is A Funny Story by Emily Henry. This is her new release. The setup of this one is hilarious. We follow two main characters that are basically dumped by their own respective partners before the start of this book. Now they're living with each other and they begin fake dating. There's all this forced proximity. There's also a small town setting during the summer. It's such a fun beach read. You should definitely check it out. Starting off the list strong, honestly. There's worse books down the line, but I feel like some of my favorite books were at the top. Next, we have Cersei by Madeline Miller. This book is also great. A beautiful, dark, and feminist retelling of this classic myth and tale. Madeline Miller has such a skill with humanizing such well-known stories and putting a new lens on something that is intrinsically so well-known. I loved Cersei, and I also loved another book of hers that is on this list. Next up, we have Babel by R.F. Kuang. I am also going to put this in the great category. This is a story set in the 1800s centering a translators guild at Oxford University. We follow our main character who attends this university. It discusses a lot of really significant and important topics from colonization to student rebellion. I feel like a lot of this book was very, very successful. Some aspects weren't necessarily perfect, but I really enjoyed the writing style. I enjoyed how researched it felt, and I also really appreciated all the footnotes that existed throughout the book too, and definitely a strong read, particularly if you're looking for a fantasy standalone book. Next, we have The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is going at the top of must read, one of my top 3 favorite fantasy series of all time. So I'm really excited to see that the Broken Earth trilogy is also becoming really popular over on Booktok. This is a series that has been out for a while now, and it's immensely popular and very lauded for very, very good reason. Personally speaking, I just feel like it's one of the most unique and genre-defying series that I have ever read. I will always recommend this series. I love this series, and every time I see anyone recommend it on Booktok, I get so excited. But this is a fantasy series set in a world where civilization and humanity is constantly ended by like climate catastrophes. Therefore, humanity has evolved in such a way that kind of allows for information to be passed on in a very specific way. There's also a group of people in this world that have magic that's able to harness the power of the earth, but instead of being lauded as possible heroes, they're shunned and very much controlled by the government. This book is just so good. It's so unique structurally from a writing style point of view. The topics that the author covers is just fantastic, and the plotting is breakneck. I love The Fifth Season so much. I also honestly love Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This is probably still, to this day, one of my favorite Leigh Bardugo series. Who doesn't love a heist tale of an unlikely group of individuals taking on an impossible task? And along the way, we fall in love with them and see them connect with one another through friendship and camaraderie. There's humor. It's a good time, and it's popular for a reason. I also feel like a great entry point to fantasy if you haven't read a lot of fantasy. It's also only a duology, and it's just Honestly, superb YA, if you ask me. Also a great book is The Song of Achilles. I think I'm also going to put this in must read. This is another retelling of a well-known Greek myth, but this time we're centering the story of Achilles, but told through the perspective of Patroclus. This is a beautiful story of love, of companionship, of coming of age. The writing style of this book is also just stunning. Same could be said with Cersei. And again, just the humanization and the reframing of such well-known tales, top notch. I also really enjoy Book Lovers. I think I'm going to put this in good. I like Emily Henry's books quite a bit, and I would honestly recommend all of them. I would just say Book Lovers for me was good. It wasn't necessarily as great as a lot of people say. I feel like it's a lot of people's favorite, and just personally wasn't mine. It is a really fun sort of twisting of the small town romance story. We follow our main character, who is kind of a boss babe, New York City career woman, and she's constantly left by her partners after they go to like a small town and fall in love with like a florist or a hotel boutique owner, this type of thing. This time though, our main character travels to a small town with her sister to sort of break this curse, but she runs into her work rival. It's fun, it centers books, there's lots of banter. Emily Henry knows how to write a contemporary romance story. I'll read all of her books for good reason, because they're just a lot of fun. Also a book that is a lot of fun is Half a Soul. This book is another more cozy Regency romance-esque story, but with a dash of fantasy. It has all the fun propriety of a Regency romance tale, dances and social expectations, but it also has a magical twist with the involvement of fae, and this dash of magic I feel like sort of elevates the series to be really fun. I've read all 3 books I want to say that are out so far within this series, and all of them are a good time. None of them will blow your mind, but they're like a solid, cozy, endearing story if you ask me. Next, we have A Court of Thorns and Roses, probably the book that I see the most on everywhere, if I'm being honest. Here's the thing with this series. I have read most of the books that have come out, if not all of them within this series, since it's been released. So I've been reading these books over a very long period of time. And from my personal point of view, I actually enjoyed the first 2 from a romantasy point of view. I found the pacing to be fun, the character dynamics to be fun. Yes, was the plotting not perfect? Was the fantasy world building not perfect? Sure. But I was entertained, particularly with book 2. But I will say since book 2, I have been very disappointed with every installment since, even if I like the characters and I find SJM's writing to be pretty digestible, like I read it quickly. I do feel like there's a shift in the priority in this series in terms of the smut levels and the romantic pacing that just personally is not my preference. I like when things are a little more drawn out and there's a little more focus on the relationship sort of growing and building between characters alongside like any steamy scene. And I feel like that balance for me is just not in a place where I personally enjoy these books anymore. And that's how I feel about that. So I'm going to put this at the top of if you were wondering. Similarly, I'm going to put The Bone Shard Daughter at the top of This is a fantasy series I wish I liked more, and I've officially DNF'd the trilogy before reading the 3rd and final book, but I have read the first 2. I think conceptually this series is great. It centers a really cool magic system that has these things called bone constructs. People can build them and control them. There's an evil emperor, and there's like rebellion, but I just found a lot of the characters and the plotting to be very surface for me, and I was just very disappointed with how this series sort of progressed book over book. Just not my favorite, unfortunately. Something that I did love and is definitely a must read is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. R.F. Kuang is popular on BookTube, on Booktok, for good reason. She writes really fantastic books. I have read every book that she has put out, and I would say the Poppy War series is still my favorite of her releases. This is a fantasy trilogy that also is heavily influenced by real history. It's incredibly dark and it is incredibly violent and disturbing. The character work and the overall plotting and just the journey we go on with our main character Rin is just amazing. Another one of my all-time favorite fantasy series. Something I would not recommend though is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I'm putting that in the no category. This, I don't want to say, okay, I feel like romantasy is kind of in a new era in the past few years, and I feel like From Blood and Ash is like kind of part of that beginning of that new era. I read the first 2 of these books now like 3 or 4 years ago, and they were so bad. There was truly no plot in this series. It was just moving characters from one place to the next for like a new steamy scene, which again, based on your preference and like what you like to read, go off. And again, just based on my own personal reading preferences, I was so bored reading these books. It was repetitive, it was uninteresting, there was no fantasy plot to be seen or heard of, and the character dynamics were not enough for me to like want to continue to read these very long books. Like these books are like 700 pages and I do not know why. So it's a no from me. But, you know, to each their own. The Night and Gale by Kristen Hanna is honestly like a great book. I read this book a long time ago, but it's still popular to this day for a reason. This is a very emotional World War II story set in occupied France. I appreciated this book because I feel like World War II is a very popular historical fiction setting, but this story is told from the perspective of two sisters during the war, their relationship, the trials and tribulations that they had to go through individually during this incredibly difficult time, their perseverance, their love for each other, but also how their relationship had to change and shift over time. It was a good book. I would recommend it. A great book club book, you know what I mean? Next we have Beach Read by Emily Henry. I'm going to put this at the back of great. My third favorite Emily Henry book. I've enjoyed all of them for different reasons, but this is the first one and a classic. Two authors who are basically in the same vacation town. One is a romance writer, one is a literary fiction guy. They do not get off on a good foot at the beginning of the story, but slowly and surely their relationship evolves in lots of fun directions. I love enemies to lovers. This was very entertaining. And again, I just feel like Emily Henry writes a vacation scene very well. Next up, we have Cruel Prince, which I'm gonna put like here. Cruel Prince is a lot of fun, and it's definitely another series why I can understand why everyone is still reading and loving the series so many years after it came out. Personally speaking, I think the first two are actually super strong. For me, I was pretty let down by the final and concluding novel within this trilogy, which is why I've put it within good. But honestly, if it stuck the landing, I would definitely have this higher up. I love a fae story, and I feel like Holly Black writes fae stories so well. The ambiance, the writing style, the sort of casual cruelty that exists within fae locations, I loved it, and the enemies to lovers situation within this book is golden until it's not. But again, I'll leave my feelings aside for the third book. The first two were a lot of fun, and I understand why it's popular. Next up, we have One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. I'm going to put this at the top of This is a series that I have read the entirety of. It's a duology, and it's just something that I feel like is really overhyped. I think it's fine. I think it's good, but it's also just not something to write home about. And I've picked up both installments kind of expecting to be blown away. Was just like really underwhelmed by the plot pacing and the romantic pairings within this book. It has a lot of potential, but it also just like wasn't a home run for me, and I was expecting more. I could maybe put this in like the back of good because there are good elements. I liked the magic system in this world, which is centered around these sort of cards. If you have one of these magical cards, you can tap it and kind of harness its powers. I liked the dark and mysterious fantasy landscape it's set in. Just the plot is really flimsy, and even the romance is a bit flimsy. I felt that with book one. I felt that with book two. I just wanted it to be better, but I would honestly give it like a 2.5 stars if I'm being transparent. A book I did really enjoy was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. This is a very popular literary fiction story following the very complex relationship between two friends that meet in childhood, meet again in college, and begin to work with one another as they develop like the most popular video game in like all of the world. You read from both of their perspectives and you follow them throughout their entire life, how the relationship really evolves and changes. I appreciated a lot of the aspects of this book. I found it to be emotional and interesting, and I can definitely see why it has like over 1 million reviews on Goodreads. Next up, we have This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is another book I really enjoyed. This is a very, very weird story. It's a sci-fi sapphic romance story, basically following two agents who have been on opposing sides of this never-ending time war, and you see them through space and time encounter each other in lots of different locations and places in some of the most bizarre scenarios you might encounter, but slowly they also begin to pass letters to one another. It's so romantic and human while also being so unbelievably bizarre. Good. It's a short book. It's a weird book. I loved it though. I did not love Red Rising by Pierce Brown. That's gonna go in the category. This book is just whatever. I did not really enjoy the first book at all. I have read the sequel. The sequel does improve, so I will say that, but Red Rising in and itself is just fine. It's kind of a hybrid sci-fi fantasy story following our main character Darrow. It's set in this world that's super stratified with the golds on the top and the reds at the bottom. And Darrow is a red and he gets involved in rebellion to kind of overthrow and dismantle the society. Conceptually, I like it, but Darrow is not a very likable main character. The female writing in this is bad. The plotting is repetitive, and also it's just the whole book is spent in like this military academy where they're just doing like Roman game simulations, which sort of feels like it has nothing to do with like the overall macro plot of the story. It wasn't for me, if I'm being honest. However, I did love Legends and Lattes. I would put this at the top of good. A cozy, endearing good time. I feel like one of the quintessential cozy fantasy recommendations. Another book I also got from Booktok. That was the first place I had ever heard of it. It's just a charming tale of a woman settling down in a fantasy village and opening up her own coffee shop. It'll make you hungry. It'll make you warm and fuzzy. It's just an endearing, fun, good time and an absolute perfect reset between some darker reads. And if you're looking for something just to unwind with, I loved it. Low stakes, super fun. Serpent and the Wings of Night, I'm gonna put at the back of good. This is a romantasy book that is also quite popular and it's good. It's not fantastic, it's not perfect, but I was entertained. It's also this like dark high fantasy vampire-esque story, and I do love a vampire romantasy book. I think it's fun. This also centers a competition. Our main character is a human raised amongst vampires, and now she's fighting in this competition to gain access to power. Our other main character is this brooding hot vampire. They cross paths. Duh. The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. Hello, a must read for a reason. It's no surprise that The Way of Kings is talked about everywhere because it's truly just that girl. Booktok, Booktube. If you haven't read The Way of Kings, do it. It's going to be a great time. And you know, while I'm just here, we're just going to also talk about Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson because this is another series that is talked about a lot. Brandon Sanderson is a really popular author. He has so many series to read and check out. I would say his most well-known series are The Way of Kings and Mistborn, both great places to start, in my opinion, if you want to check out his works in writing. Epic fantasy, great magic system, great characters, very approachable writing, and just like classic fantasy recommendations for a reason. They will be everywhere and anywhere for a very long time and will continue to be so in the future. I love that Booktok loves them. I love reading and talking about them on Booktok. So yeah, of course, must reads. Honestly, another must read is Abby Jimenez's Yours Truly. I had a blast reading this. I again didn't love Part of Your World, and this is book 2 within that series, but Yours Truly absolutely brought it up a notch and made me really love Abby Jimenez's writing. This is like co-workers, rivals to lovers. There's letter writing within it, which in general is one of my favorite things to encounter within romance, but the romantic pacing, perfect. Does use miscommunication? Yes, I will say, if you don't like that, maybe this will annoy you. But similarly to Happy Place, the angst and tension that existed between these two characters was perfect. I read this book in one day. I could not put it down. I also loved how sweet and anxious the main male character was. I had a blast reading it. I'm not gonna lie. Another book that is great is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I love Rebecca Ross's writing. It's beautiful and stunning, and I feel like her balance of fantasy and romance is perfect, and my personal preference when it comes to balancing these two things. Another workplace rivals to lovers sort of situation, and also centers letter writing. So again, I'm predictable in this way, but this is set in a fantasy world that kind of has like turn of the century vibes, and there's this great war that's been going on for a long time. Our two main characters work at the same newspaper and they're vying against each other for an editorial position. Then they both also travel to the war front to kind of report on what's going there. It's dangerous, it's romantic, it's magical, it's great. Next up we have Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I love this book. This is by far probably the best YA fantasy book I have read in years. Just the characters, the writing, the plotting, book 1 and book 2, absolutely home runs. I can't wait for the next installment in this. Even if you don't read a lot of YA fantasy, Legendborn is so good, and it's popular again for a reason because it's just excellent. It's set on the UNC campus. We follow our main character Bree, who is living on this campus because she's attending like a very prestigious high school program, and from there she gets involved in this sort of like secret society on campus to fight these monsters that it's all tied to like King Arthur's Round Table. It's so good. It's so good. It's so good. It's so good. Tracy Deonn, it's so good. Another book that was wholly and fully a wreck from Booktok that I ended up really enjoying is Once Upon a Broken Heart. I will say I went into this book with kind of low expectations. It's a YA fantasy story that's sort of set like a fairy tale. We're following our main character who has her heart broken, so she goes to the god of broken hearts and makes a deal with him. He agrees to help her in exchange for 3 kisses of his choosing. Her life's thrown upside down. She's now the most sought after girl in town. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't interested in Stephanie Garber's other series, which is Caraval, but I decided to check out this series, and it's been so cute. It's just such a perfect YA fantasy series. I love how endearing the main character is. I love rooting for her. I love the back and forth between the characters. The inclusion of these different magical elements is so well done. Like, it's lighthearted. It's serious, but also not too serious, and it reads just like a fairy tale. Like, I think it's so cute and fun. I love it. Next, we have The Sword of Kaigan. This is a must-read book. Probably one of, if not my favorite standalone fantasy novels. More people need to be talking about this book, if I'm being honest. ML Wong is a talent. The amount of things she's able to fit in to a standalone fantasy novel from a world building and characterization point of view is ridiculous. I don't know how she does it. If you want something that has elemental magic like Avatar: The Last Airbender, but the politics of some of the most intense fantasy novels you will ever read, with the emotional impact and characters you will fall in love with of some of my other favorite stories, The Sword of Kaigan is for you. It has it all in a standalone novel, and it will destroy you, if I'm being honest. Next, we have Heartless Hunter. This is an for me. It's fine, but it's not a 4.4, which is like the rating it has on Goodreads with like 60,000 reviews. Like, I feel like something is just like not clicking in my head. This was a recent read. It's an enemies to lovers situation set in a historical sort of murky fantasy landscape, centering a witch and a witch hunter who are courting each other for their own like machinations, if you will. Conceptually, I liked all of the inputs. I just found the execution to be fine. Wasn't bad. It was an easy read. Kind of feels like a CW show, but it's also kind of forgettable and not something I would necessarily like write home about. You know what I mean? So like, not bad, but also not very good either. I need to move Shadow and Bone up, honestly. Next up, we have The Priory of the Orange Tree, which I'm gonna put at the back of good. This is a standalone fantasy novel that I have kind of a love-hate relationship with. I did not love the payoff of this standalone novel. It's very long, and there's lots of honestly very intricate like world building and character work throughout the entire thing, but I found the last chunk of this book to be so underwhelming in terms of the plot payoff that it's hard for me to like look back on it fondly. I like Samantha Shannon's writing, and I love this world she's crafted and how these dragons have impacted culture and religion through time, and how we're sort of on the edge of this end of the world crisis with a dangerous dragon like reawakening once again. Like, a lot of this is good, like really good, but the ending was just like not good in my opinion, that it sort of brings down the whole thing. But I also understand why it's popular, and I'm definitely in the minority opinion here, but it is what it is. Another book that I didn't love is Daughter of the Moon Goddess, which I'm going to put like right here. A fantasy book that's inspired by mythology. We follow our main character who's the daughter of the moon, which I love in theory. I think this is a book of like so many inputs of this I enjoy, but again, the execution wasn't totally for me. And I just found myself never truly connected to the story or the characters because everything felt kind of rushed to me, but I love the mythology inspiration, and I honestly wish I liked it more than I did, but alas. The Invisible Life of Addie Laroo. Wow, this is really bringing me back. This is fine. I'm going to put this here. This is a book that is fine. Personally, I love V.E. Schwab's writing. I've read a lot of her books over the years, and I think I like all of her books that I've read more than this book. So this is probably my least favorite of her books, but it's still good, and I can definitely see why people love it. Standalone fantasy novel. The story centers on a young woman who basically is immortal, and we follow her through like centuries of time. But the catch to her long life is that no one can ever remember her name, so she's sort of invisible until one day a young man in a bookstore does, which sort of changes everything forever. Again, I enjoyed it, but it definitely isn't a book that I felt like has stuck with me over the years. So I would recommend it if you're interested, but also it's like not my favorite. Next, we have Abby Jimenez's Just for the Summer. This book is fun. I really enjoyed this book too. Not as much as yours truly, but also Had a great time. Again, Abby Jimenez set in the same world as the other two installments. We're following two characters. Both of them have this curse where they date someone and then they break up, and shortly after their breakup, they find their true love. These two characters realize the other person has this thing, and so they decide to sort of fake date each other so they could break the curse for each other, and obviously things get more complicated from here. Something I liked about this book especially was all of the Easter egg and characters that we know and love from previous installments definitely played more of a center stage role within this book. I also appreciated how emotional and character focused this was. I would say Emily Henry and Abby Jimenez do a really good job of having like individual character journeys alongside a romance, which makes their stories feel like very fulfilling and whole, emotional but still happy and light, like a good balance of things. I flew through just for the summer. Alrighty, we are in the home stretch, I promise. Next is Throne of Glass by SJM. I'm gonna put this in good. I would say of all of the books by SJM, I think this series is the most consistent from beginning to end. I still feel like the end is too bloated and definitely still not perfect, but obviously I read Throne of Glass now many years ago and really enjoyed many of the early books and honestly some of the later books. It's not my favorite fantasy series I've ever read. It's not my favorite YA fantasy series I've ever read, but of all of her books, I do think it's the best one. I also think it's the most balanced book in terms of like fantasy plot writing and romance. There's all of these things, but it's not quite in the romantasy category like a lot of her other book series are now. So if you're looking for something that is not romantasy, this would be that, in my opinion. Next is A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle Jensen. This is gonna go in the category for me. This one breaks my heart, and if you watched my recent vlog, you might have seen me spiral while reading this book. This is a Norse mythology-centered romantasy story following our main character who sort of gets wrapped up in this very complicated political scenario and is also involved in this prophecy. She's being used by a lot of different people. It's dangerous and complex. I actually loved the first half of this book. I would give the first half of this book 5 out of 5 stars. I was into the romance. I was into the plotting. I was into the writing. I was into the setting. I was having a blast. And then halfway through, I feel like all the strengths of the first half just sort of like disappeared, and we got a very repetitive circular story. Our female main character felt very different than the first half of the book. It was so weird from a reading experience point of view that I still don't quite know where to place this book. Next, we have The Will of the Many by James Islington. I would put this book in must read. Another book that's sort of taking the internet by storm, both on Booktok and Booktube. I read this last year, right when it came out, and it was so fun. Honestly, I feel like The Will of the Many is everything that Red Rising wishes it was in terms of like plot execution. The Will of the Many is a Roman-inspired fantasy world following our main character who's sort of this chosen one, exceptional individual. In this fantasy world, you kind of have to give over your will literally, so it can be harnessed as magic by like other powerful people. Our main character gets wrapped up in lots of different conspiracies. He's literally a spy for multiple different factions and he's just trying to survive. We follow him as he's at this very prestigious military school. So much action, so much adventure, so much stuff happens. I can't wait for book 2. It was so entertaining and honestly a lot of fun. I feel like the balance of everything really worked in this. Another great book is Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. In fact, this might be one of my favorite Brandon Sanderson books from a standalone point of view. This is a fun, heartwarming story following our main character Tress, who sets out into the wide world to save the love of her life. It very much gives like Princess Bride. It's funny and cute and clever and whimsical. I just had a great time. I had like no expectations reading this book and was blown out of the water. Another really great book, I would say, or a really good book, is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed. This is a dark academia kind of rival story. It also has such a beautiful gloss and glimmer to it. This book is a YA story with a stunning writing style, very lyrical, very transporting. This book also centers some darker topics, and I do appreciate how the author sort of explored those. Fae, weird, creepy, atmospheric, all of these things. Remote house and property, crumbling manor vibes, you know what I mean? Lots of rain. Great fall book. Another very ambient-centered story is A River Enchanted. I love A River Enchanted. I think more. I'm gonna do this. We're gonna do this. River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross is my favorite series by this author. It's another duology centering this magical island that's cursed because two sides have been in conflict for so long. There's magic here. Our main character is a bard, and so song and history are all intertwined in this very complex conflict. So good. Again, lyrical writing style, stunning, transporting. Read A River Enchanted if you haven't. Should read it. And you know what? Actually, I feel like I'm going to move some stuff. I'm going to put Midnight Library in no, because I don't like that book. I'm going to put ACOTAR in no. At the top of no. I'm going to put Shadow and Bone up here. Okay. I feel good about that. All right, next up, we have Fourth Wing, which I'm going to put in no. I did not like this book at all. I have a whole reading vlog about this book. This is a new hyper-popular romantasy series centering a military academy and dragons and a romance. And honestly, I like all of those things generally, but I really struggled with this book from a world building point of view, from a magic system point of view, from a romance point of view, from a writing style point of view. I just did not really enjoy this that much, if I'm being straightforward. And I also couldn't get over how it just kept feeling like American Ninja Warrior, but just put into a fantasy novel like over and over again. Similarly, Crescent City by SJM, I'm going to put at the back of because again, I really loved the first installment of this series. This is an urban fantasy story by SJM. It's basically centering in this city where there's all of these different mythical and magical creatures sort of living and existing amongst each other. It was a really interesting concept and idea, and how she sort of explored it in book one. I appreciated lots of action, very dramatic romance at the core of it. And I will say, I don't really like the romantic pairing of this series. But I did like book one. I hated book two though. And so I guess my final ranking hinges on book three if I ever read it. But for now, it's at the back of which I'm acting like I have it high up. I don't have it high up. It's pretty low rated if I'm being honest. Alrighty guys, and let me just quickly check if there's anything I want to move around based on these rankings here, but I feel pretty good about everything if I'm being honest. And as you can see, I would say I have read some really fantastic books that are also popular on Booktok. I think a general trend you could say is that a lot of the romantasy that's popular on Booktok I don't necessarily love, but there have been so many books that also are popular on Booktok that I have really enjoyed. There's books that I've gotten directly from Booktok and read that I've really enjoyed. So again, keep that in mind at the end of the day. It's ultimately all about the creators and the books that you get served. So while there's many books on Booktok that I might not like and enjoy, there's so many books that I do. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye!